I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and surfing was just starting out. And this one kind of little country kid came up to me one time and he said, "Hey, I'm going over to the Gulf to go surfing. You want to go?" And I said, "Yeah." And he knew this guy over there was a congressman's son. I can't remember his name. Oh, Greg Howe was his name. And they had a Greg Knoll hot curl or something, a pintail, and another board. And Greg and another guy that were a little bit older, they went out and they let us just go, and the water was crystal clear. And the first time I kind of took a couple strokes, I got on this little dribbler and rode it all the way into the beach, man. I was just sold, you know. No motors, no nothing, just riding, you know. And then this friend of mine in Tampa, Pete Diaz, got the surfing fever, and he would go up the coast because his mom lived in Virginia every year, and we would go up and stop at Pawleys Islands and all kinds of different places. And he had a board and we just shared it, you know. And that's how I got hooked on surfing, you know, way in the early days, you know. We would go to all the different beaches up the coast, in Hatteras and Nag's Head and stuff. We didn't even know that much about Hatteras. We mostly went to Nag's Head. That was the cool place in those days, you know. My friend Pete Diaz, he signed up to go to Vietnam, and I can't remember the exact year, and he said, "Here, take care of my board." And it was a 9/8, you know, 50-pound or 40-pound board, you know, and he said, "Here, just take care of my board and have it for me when I get back." And I was so skinny, I weighed like 125, so I'd have to run up to the knee paddle and run up to the nose to drop in and then start back pedaling as soon as they caught the wave and go backwards. So what I did one day was I cut 1.5 feet off of it. And all my friends back in those days, they were going, "You're not going to be able to paddle that out. You ruined that board. And, you know, you won't be able to sit on it out in the water." And we drove across to Ormond Beach, and I paddled out, and I turned around and caught the first wave and rode it right to the beach, and they were all freaking out, man, because I could all of a sudden do some cutbacks and stuff, you know, instead of, in those days, half the kids were just going straight, you know. Well, as things developed, word got out that I was the kid who cut down the surfboard, and in Tampa, there was these other guys on the other side of town, and they were good surfers, and we started hanging out together. Tony Lemus and Dave Mendoza. And Dave Mendoza had just bought a brand new Surfboards Hawaii Model A, lime green tint, light lime green on the deck and lime green bottom. And we started talking, and we cut a foot off of his board. Man, people wanted to strangle him, man. And he all of a sudden started surfing really good. And you know, another kid had an Oceanside spoiler, and he just gave it to me, and I cut that all down, and I cut it down to 8 feet, and I had just met this really cool chick, you know, and her name was Debbie, and she bought it from me for $60. So I was in business, man. And then we came over every summer. Well, we used to drive straight to Ormond Beach because you could just drive I-4 from Tampa straight to Ormond Beach. And it was kind of a lot more choppy and a little bit bigger and a little bit juicier. But this friend of mine, Henry Wilson, said, "Have you guys ever been to Cocoa Beach?" And, you know, we said, "Well, we'll go down and try it out." So we drove down, and when we got there, it was oil slick glass, and it was about waist to chest high peeling. And we're like, "Oh, what have we been doing, you know?" And we just paddled out, and we were kind of hooked on Cocoa Beach after that, you know. Graduated from high school in '68, and we had been coming over every summer, and just moved directly over in '68, you know. And Tony Lemus, Dave Mendoza, and Jerry Bonilla from Tampa, and Ronnie Engel, they were like the best surfers in Tampa.
I followed him over from Tampa, and because I love surfing. And my friend and I, we'd collect Coke bottles and all that same old stuff you had to do when you're 17, 16 years old to get gas money, whatever. You know, luckily gas was 25 cents a gallon. That ages me really well there. So, and then eventually I graduated high school in '70 and moved straight over and started surfing and waitressing and rode my bike. I was a waitress at Lynn's, downtown Cocoa Beach. We go surfing. The best parts you had to watch out for is you bend over a table and you know how water pours out your nose after you've been surfing so much. You know, so always all those girls that were surfers in there, you'd see them, they just go like this real quick, turn around. A lot of girls coming up then. It was fun surfing, you know, and everybody, we just had a really good clique everywhere. You know, you could surf, nobody vibe you out, unless you surfed at RC's and you were a chick, you were sent down the beach. I never would surf there, I wouldn't surf inlet, I'd surf, mostly when we were in Cocoa Beach, I surfed 16th in that area.
We used to stay in the Oceanus trailer park and surf out there, and then eventually we moved towards 16th Street, you know, because there was a little surf ghetto there and you could get apartments for cheap, and 5 guys could live in one apartment for $125 a month, you know. Collect bottles and pay for the rent, you know.
Well, we lived right across the street from the beach. We just surfed 16th. We knew it really well. It was just fun. Nobody was ever down there, you know, except the dog catcher. He always had to come harass our dog. So, and then when we came this way, and we started getting involved in more and more boards and more in this, well, we went to Hatteras and all that stuff and came back. We moved straight back to 16th. We got our apartment right on the ocean then. It was great.
Yeah, there was, well, the Weber shop opened up right down from there, and Rich and Phil Salick kind of worked in the shop, and it was Mike Tabling's shop, who was the best younger guy around. I mean, there was already Claudie and Gary Proper, but they mostly surfed up at the pier. But they had this little Weber surf team. It was Keith Gardner and Dinky Gardner, Greg Lohr, and this kid Mike Klein. And those kids were like super hot, and they were all real nice kids, so we just all got in with them and hung out and surfed it, and every once in a while Tabling would show up and blow everybody's mind, you know, and set the new level for what we had set our goals on, you know. But yeah, a little bit more waves down at 15th and 16th in the pier, you know. There was that whole pier thing going on, you know. It's like the really cool guys were all at the pier, and then eventually they moved down to Second Light, and that was the in place where the photographers would show up and the hot guys would be and stuff. So we were down in that area, you know.
So that evolved into making surfboards over on this side of the coast.
We had already in Tampa started ordering some blanks, and they were like, you had to order 12-foot blanks from Foss Foam, and we would get these blanks. By then, we had kept moving shorter. Well, if it's shorter is better, let's keep going. So we got all the way down to 5'8", 5'2", and 5'3" single fins and stuff. And we were having to order 12-foot blanks to do it, you know, because back then there was this real heavy thing about Walker and Clark getting together with all the manufacturers out there and going, hey, don't sell anybody any blanks or we'll boycott you, you know, the guys that were really had big factories and stuff like that. So it was real hard to get blanks, so we got Foss Foam, and then eventually we got Walker Foam, which is a real good blank too. We built a Visqueen and cardboard lean-to next to our apartment at 16th Street, and we were just making boards there, and more. It was getting more and more around, and guys like some of the Weber team guys were like coming by and getting boards, like Keith, and you know, they were still on the Weber team, but you know, Weber was doing like the Weber ski and stuff, and we did Keith aboard, who was the hottest guy in that area, and Mike Klein, and so as time developed, my friends Tony Lemus and Dave Mendoza got real into building trimaran sailboats. So their whole plan was, we're going to sail down to islands and everything else, and they had the technical skills from the resin work and everything. So they started building these beautiful trimarans and stuff, and we kind of parted way. And then Greg Lohr and Jeff Crawford and Busby were down at the trailer park, and they were messing with boards. And so Greg was sponsored by Catri, So he shipped them off to Hawaii, which was cool. And Crawford went to Hawaii because in those days, if you're at the upper level, the test for you was, okay, how's this guy from the East Coast going to do in Hawaii? And so all of a sudden, Busby's all by himself, and he came down and introduced himself, and Scott Busby and I hit it off right away, you know, because we're two shy dorks that were wanting to make surfboards, you know, and everybody else was out trying to conquer the world, you know. So we got together, and eventually this kid Rick Holt showed up, but he was around for a year or so, and then he had to split because of the draft. He didn't want to get drafted, so he went to Hawaii. But we kept getting a little bit better and a little bit better, and Ron Rubino had the Plastic Fantastic shop in Cocoa Beach, and Busby knew him real well because they went to school together. And he had us come up there one day, which was probably a smarter way instead of having guys bootlegging boards in your town. He said, I'll put you guys boards in here if you can do flawless pin lines, perfect glosses, and I already know your shapes are okay and stuff like that. And so he set the standard high and bought 4 or 5 boards from us, and he started selling them out of Plastic Fantastic shop. And then he said, I want to introduce you to this guy, George Easley. And George Easley was one of the pier guys, you know, one of the real good pier surfer dudes, you know. And so he came and he wanted to start Natural Art. Well, Natural Art was already a surf movie that was out, and it was like a perfect name, and said, okay, we'll do our boards and we'll do your boards. And we went along for a while, and my lungs messed up because in those days you didn't have the safety equipment. So I couldn't even hardly breathe, you know, because I was routing, polishing, and sanding, and Busby was doing all the laminating, and we had junk masks and stuff. And so I said, we got to find somebody else. So there was David Balzarak wanted to move up the ladder, and this kid Greg Lohr had come back from Hawaii. And when he was in Hawaii, Al Chapman took him under his wing, introduced him to Brewer, and let him stand in the shaping rooms and stuff and learn. I mean, they were like light years ahead of everybody else. We were kind of like piecing boards together and bending wood for templates and stuff like that, you know. And so Greg came back, and it was really funny because, you know, he put these awesome bottoms on the boards, you know, like he could just run a planer from the nose to the tail that he learned from them, instead of like going, oh, I'm going to put a V here and I'm going to put a little more rocker in the nose and stuff. And everything was plain nose to tail, and he would accelerate with the planer to have it dig the V and then come back to make it deeper behind the V for about 6 inches, so it was flat behind the V. It didn't have a V running off the tail, which back then everybody would spiral V and get that V deep and stuff like that. And he had these bottoms that were just awesome, but he hadn't learned how to put decks and rails on. So I showed him a basic thing of how I put decks and rails on, and he just took off, you know. So it wasn't P. Dooley, S. Busby, Contact, or it wasn't anything. You know, I just said, we got to come up with another name. So George was not really doing a whole lot with it, so we just kind of said, let's make a whole big group here and call it Natural Art, you know. And it took off from there. Because my friend Pete Diaz and I had gone up and down the coast every summer, I kind of had a little knack for traveling up and down the coast. And so we got all wound up and like we got ahead 23 boards, and we were all like pumped, man. We took the whole crew, Greg, George, Busby, me, and Scott had met this kid, Ricky Koger, in the Bahamas when he was surfing. And Ricky told us, you know, he called him up in Charleston, in Folly Beach, and he said, stop by. So we stopped by with 23 boards, and one kid after another's coming by, because all the surf shops then still had kind of longboards, or what California guys were kind of, that were all longboard shapers and designers and glassers, were making heavier, trying to get down to the shortboard realm. But we were already kind of there. Just, we came from the bottom up, and they were kind of coming from long down. But anyways, we're spending the night there, and kids kept coming by, and we sold like 10 of the boards, and we had about 20 orders from Folly Beach, you know, and we got to get out of here because we don't want to just go up to Folly and go home. So we went up and stopped at Atlantic Beach, North Carolina, and went into Tommy Morrow's shop, and he just went, give me the rest of your boards, you know. And we had like 40 orders, and we had sold the 23. We were going to go all the way to New York, you know. So we just said, we got to go back and start making boards, man. So we went back, and that was what really kind of like it's like wide open. You could go to any town, and back then there was 4 surf shops or at least 2 shops in every town. And you could just, if one shop didn't want them, you just drove down the street, and there's usually a younger guy in there and he'd go, bring them on, guys, you know. So that's when natural art started kicking off. And what had happened was when we were like making the boards and stuff, Greg had already become almost a superstar because guys saw him surfing in Hawaii and, you know, just were like blown away. So he was meeting all these Australian guys and everything else. But Greg had come back one day, and I was walking to our apartment in 16th Street, and Greg had just come down from up at the East Coast Championships, and he walked down, he went, I won, you know? And we're like just these scruffy kids from Cocoa Beach, and he won the East Coast Surfing Championships. And we're like going, cool. And I had loved going up and down the coast, you know? And so Greg goes, hey, I want to move up there and I want to win it 2 times in a row. And we went, wow, that's cool. Yeah, we'll move up there. And there was this group of guys in the same old 16th Street ghetto. There was this little fast-talking kid from North Carolina, from Buxton, you know? And he was down there, and he goes, you boys come up there, I'll set you up, man. His name was Don B. He goes, I'll get you set up. So we went up there, Scott Busby and I, and skulked around in the town and met a lot of the local surfers up there and stuff. And we found this old fish house, and we went, and this lady rented to us only because we knew Don B. and she knew his parents and everything else, you know. Anyway, so we moved up there, and we went from doing, and at the same time, Greg and George knew Tommy Moss, who's like the master craftsman, and Tommy was out in Santa Cruz at Overland Surfboards, and Rich Price was out there with him. And Tommy and Rich, they called him up and said, we're moving the factory to Hatteras, you know, and told him all about it, and they drove straight over, man. And the funny story of it was Greg, the year before to get ready for the championships, he went up there in the winter and worked as a garbage man so that he could surf Hatteras by himself and be prepped for it. So we decided to do a highway cleanup in front of the building that we had for our factory and stuff like that. And we started going and cleaning up the road. And Tommy and Rich had and Tommy's wife Elaine pulled up. Tommy had this old purple truck. And he looked around, and finally a kid walked by our factory, and they said, where are all those guys? Are they here? And stuff like that. And the kid goes, they're just out picking up trash. So Tommy thought we had gone like Greg's route. We're working for the trash pickup. And we came back to our parking lot, and T. Moss had just started his truck up and was just putting it in gear, ready to head back to California. And we said, no, we were just cleaning up the highway. So anyways, those guys came, and T. Moss was like, he had been to Hawaii, and he worked in Santa Cruz with Overland Surfboards and West Cliff, and so had Rich. And they had Rich Price had this polishing system down. Everybody was using this stinky DuPont stuff and everything, and Rich Price was dry sanding the boards, no wet sanding, and had this stuff Sure Luster that nobody had on the East Coast that didn't stink. And so we started doing boards, and all of a sudden kids were buying our boards from Maryland and coming down to Hatteras from New Jersey and all around North Carolina. So we built up a dealer network from Hatteras all the way up to New York. New York kids were coming by and buying boards and stuff. And then there was this little scruffy building at the front of the fish house, and we built it all up and put a little surf shop in there. It was classic, you know. That was our first shop. No, actually, I think a couple of years ago, they mowed down the building and stuff. It was like, Carol was a good artist, so she got up there and wrote natural art on the building. And we made a front door for it, and we made it out of fiberglass, and so nobody could break in because it was a fiberglass window. So, but yeah, it took off from there. And then Greg Lohr went, he got second in the East Coast Championships that year, and then he went to Hawaii because it was getting cold up in Hatteras. So did Rich. Rich went with him as his protege to go to Hawaii, because Greg was going to show him all the ropes over there. So they went to Hawaii, and Greg wrote us a letter and said, I don't want to come back to Hatteras. And we were up there freezing, man, freezing. And we couldn't get resin to go off. And so I said, he goes, I'll teach Rich how to shape so he can come back to Hatteras, and I'll teach him everything I know. And so we said, nah, we'll move back to Florida. So we moved back to Florida, and that's when we got a factory in Merritt Island and stuff. And we went from 72 boards to 150 boards in Hatteras, and then we moved down, got a little factory in Merritt Island, and we went up to 750 boards, and then the next year we did 1,000 something. And in the meantime, pro surfing started up, and I was on my way up to judge at the Easter contest, and I was driving up from Satellite Beach, and I drove by, and the Oceanside shop was empty. Bill and Mar Jane, who owned it for years, had sold it to a guy, and he lost interest and just closed it up and walked away from it on Easter weekend. It's empty. And so I went, Steve Holloway's always tight with Bill and Mar Jane, and he'll probably know how to get a hold of him. And Steve was one of those guys, when Busby wanted to go on a trip, either Steve Holloway would come and laminate and cover for Busby, so he was like almost part of the crew, and Freddie Grosskreutz would come up and laminate and cover for Buzz, for his 2-week sabbatical surf trip or something. And so I called up Steve Holloway, and he contacted Bill and Mar Jane, and they're two of the nicest people on earth, and they just said, oh, sure, you guys can move in there, we'll have it at this price or whatever the price was or something, which was really reasonable. And went to, we just called up all our friends and reps and stuff and said, hey, you want to put something in here? And went to beloved Bill Yerkes, and he said, go in the warehouse and start picking out trunks, man, and shirts and stuff. So and then all kinds of different companies, started going, yeah, we'll give you we'll front you to start. By then, we were doing 2,000 and 3,000 and still doing more boards. And in the meantime, had got this factory built over there, designed with everything we knew. And this kid, Mike Notary, who was on our surf team, was an engineer. He got an engineering degree from FIT. And his dad was the guy who designed the recovery boosters off the shuttle and stuff. The whole ship going. So, like, we're kind of dealing with these geniuses now. And we designed this factory with a mezzanine in the middle. In the old days, it was like, okay, the glossing room's here, but we'll have the shaping room butted up against it, and then we'll build a sanding room kind of onto it, and he'll suck the fumes out, and this guy's dust, we'll just make sure that dust on the shaper doesn't really get on the gloss boards or something like that. So we had all the rooms separate, all around the outside of the thing, an idea stolen from wave riding vehicles. I went up to their factory, and they had a giant mezzanine in all the rooms out around the side. So we did that, and we had a hole in the roof. We had 2 placements where fresh air was sucked in by all the fans. So there was fresh air coming into our factory all the time, getting sucked, and the fumes were getting blown out. And by then, we could do, we had like unlimited boards we could do, and Clark had opened up a warehouse. And then we didn't have enough places to store them in the factory, so we got a surf shop at the south end of Satellite Beach. We got into the surf shop community of Satellite Beach, which, you know, people from everywhere go to Cocoa Beach, but there's this heavy surf community from Satellite and Indian Harbor Beach kids that go to these breaks that it's not easy to go to and park to, and they were just kids that ripped at every beach, you know, and guys started coming in, getting on natural arts. Chris Burge, this kid that worked packing boxes out at some computer company, and all these different guys, and Bob Roman, this kid showed up in his Mustang with pipes sticking out the side and said, "Pete Hodgson told me you guys are the guys to go with, and you guys are going places." So he got on our boards, and this was the old days when your team guys used to come in every 2 or 3 days and bring 4 kids with them and go, "Hey, you're getting this, and that red one looks like the one you need," and stuff, you know. Which, as pro surfing came along, the kids were too arrogant and prepaid to even show up in your shop. But in those days, your team guys just raked it in. Chris Birch had a crew who were coming in, and then this little kid, Ricky Carroll, showed up, you know, and it was just amazing, man. And he came out to the factory, to the new big factory, and hung out there for a while, just kind of doing odd jobs. And one day I walked in the factory and I went, there was this like longboard perfectly done in there, and I went, what is this? Where did this come from? Because I had my Apple Mac Plus, whatever it was, and I had everything on computers, all the boards we had, all the blanks and everything else. And they go, "Oh, that kid Ricky just wanted to show you what he could do, so he spent all night making that board. He shaped it and airbrushed it and glassed it and everything." Holy crap. You know, so all of a sudden we had this secret quiet master craftsman kid with Tommy Moss and all of these different guys that were just super craftsmen, you know. And yeah, and then we got in the Satellite shop.
It was
the world's smallest surf
yeah, it was
shop.
like 20 by 20. And we had a few boards in there, we had a few t-shirts and wax. And that's what we had. And that's where we met Chris Birch. He grew up down there, and he came in the shop and said, "Yeah, I want to surf for you guys. I like this place, you know." They were really nice. Kids are so nice, you know. We had such great kids and teams, and I just loved them all. Loved help raising them. If they had issues, helping them out as much as any way that we could, Pete could or I could, you know. There's all these good surfers, and not even if they weren't good, they were still good kids, you know. And apparently we raised a lot of kids. Can't even remember, but when you think back on it, there's a lot of them came through here. And they still remember us, which is cool. So we must have made some impression on them, you know. Try to keep them out of trouble.
The thing is we always thought summer, got to be ready for summer and going up and down the coast. And this crazy kid came up from South Florida, and Kirk Cottrell, and he just went, "Hey, I'm going to start buying boards from you. You know, I want to get boards." And he bought the Island Water Sports from Carl Bolak, who had sold it and moved up and was managing our shop. So this kid comes up and he's like buying 15 boards. He was working at night as a waiter in South Florida, so he had wads of cash, and coming up and buying 15, 20 boards. And then we started going to South Florida in the winter, so we were making money year-round instead of, oh, everybody's got to go look for an odd job in the winter. We were like going all year-round, you know.
Who was Hollywood boy?
Damon George.
Damon George. Damon George. We had a shop party once, and so we had it at the house, and I had it all set. He was going to open the shop in the morning, right? You know. Well, he went discoing in Orlando. 11 o'clock in the morning, I get a call, "Hey, your shop's not open. Where are you guys?" You know, I went, oh, that happened quite often. Or they didn't lock the door, you know. Had a catch-up fight in one. you know, kids think they were kids. They'd catch hell when I caught them though. So
But wasn't Damon asleep in the shop?
he was asleep behind the counter.
Yeah.
He made it there. He was just asleep behind the counter. Yeah. So it was, you know, you just kind of have to roll with it because look what people have to deal with nowadays, you know, to try to get somebody to work. At least, you know, most of our people showed up.
Well, when we were in Hatteras even, they had the first surf expo, and it was by the ESA. Doc Couture said, we've got to feed in, you know, get the surfing industry help us along with the ESA, which was at the time the largest surfing competitive organization. It had like 5,000 members, you know, and it was up and down the coast. And the ESA in those days was so cool because we would pull in, everybody surfed against each other. It wasn't like all sectioned out like it is now. So we would pull into Atlantic Beach, North Carolina, and some kid would walk by and go, George, hey, Greg. So we'd be meeting the locals before we even went into a shop. We were in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Some guy's walking down the boardwalk, and he goes, oh, George Easley. George was one of the most friendliest guys you ever met in the world, and everybody loved him. So any town you went into, they either knew Greg or they knew George Easley. Buzz and I were these timid little weirdos who didn't want to even go in the shop and talk to anybody. We just want to make boards. So, you know, that worked out great too, you know. And then they had the first surf expo in Virginia Beach. And I mean, this kind of young guy was there, Al Merrick from California, and different guys, you know. And we're like going, wow, this is pretty cool. And Ross Houston was there, and he was really involved with ESA. And then when we moved back down here, Ross Houston had one at the Cocoa Beach Hilton, was it? Ramada Inn. And that was really cool because that was the first one where all the reps were there. It was really funny, and this is where Cocoa Beach magic comes into it. Everybody just had a table with a little bunting around it and sat at their table and waited for people to come up. Well, Ross asked us, he said, it's really kind of filled up in the main thing. Do you want to get an apartment and go ahead and put your stuff in there? So we went, yeah, that'd be cool. So we had places where people could sit down on a bed and go in and pee if they had to and stuff. And then Wayne Coombs, who is like the most insane artist in Cocoa Beach, we said, Wayne, why don't you lay this thing out for us? So Wayne came and he's putting lava carvings out in front of this motel room so people see it, and tiki's everywhere. And then all these reps are coming up and going, do my booth. And he made $20,000 the first surf expo in Florida. Because everybody's going, hey, do this. And Wayne's going out and buying bamboo and redoing everybody's booth and stuff, you know. So that was pretty cool. But not the first one so much, but the second one in Kissimmee. Word had gotten out, and people started showing up from Barbados and Puerto Rico and Chile and Panama. And all of a sudden, we've got a dealer in Panama, and we've got a dealer in Barbados. These two young guys came up and said, hey, we want to get your boards and take them down to Barbados. I had heard about Barbados, but it was like, there's so many good surfers down there then. These guys literally were so dedicated that they took all the top surfers in Barbados in 1972 and rode a mail boat from Barbados, island to island, got to New Orleans, got on a Greyhound, and went out to San Diego for the World Contest. You know? And then they knew Takayama, and they knew all these guys because competition back then was the social meeting place for everybody. So we had the East Coast Championship, and we had George Easley, who's like a 4A surfer, and Scott was a 3A surfer, and all of this stuff. So we could just weave in and out of the coast. And actually, on one of the trips up and down the coast, Debbie and I went to New Jersey, and we were coming back, and we stopped at the Cape May Ferry, and this guy came up, and we started chatting with him, and he was doing a travel story from France on the East Coast. And he started talking to us and stuff. It was like the Life magazine or something. He was big time. And He was also the mayor of Orléans, France. And he said, I know somebody who has a surf shop in France, you know, I'll talk to him and stuff like that. And so next there's these guys from England coming over and France, and the French guys going like, you guys have to come over here. We have a huge contest every year. And they had it was the Lacanau Surf Club. Each town in France had their surf clubs, and they would compete against each other. And I saw that there was a dead end for all these kids that surfed all year in the ESA, and they would win the juniors, or they would they'd surf for 3 or 4 years, and they'd win the East Coast Championships. They'd come home, nowhere to go after that. So pro surfing was just starting up. So I said, man, these guys are the greatest surfers that we have on the East Coast. They need to go and make money doing that instead of going, I'm going to go get a planer and hack up 20 blanks and learn the shape and, not know the pricing and everything else to do and stuff like that. So I went, hey, this pro surfing can be the next level beyond the amateur thing. And there was a bit of a war where ESA and WSA, they hated pro surfing, and all of California hated pro surfing. You're supposed to be a soul surfer. But eventually it came around, and that was a good thing too, It gave kids who are hot, you just move right into pros, go try and see how far you can go, man, Dick Catree did a trick on me one time. I was in a heat at the pier on my 5'3" hot pink fish that there was no airbrushing really back then. I mean, it wasn't a fish, it was a twin fin, and I sprayed it with fluorescent pink slip check and glassed it. So nobody had a fluorescent pink board, and Regis Japinko was a good artist. So I had him draw a pig on it with a bulldog thing on it. Okay, so I'm surfing in a heat with Freddie Grosskreitz, who's riding a G&S Egg, and gosh, who he is, some guy from California that had an 11-inch tail and a full gun, and the guy who wore beaver tails, I can't remember his name right now, but he was really famous at the time. So we paddle out in the heat, and Timmy Davies, Rich, and Phil are up on the pier with a pitcher of beer, leaning over, and Timmy goes, "You got it, Freddie, don't worry." I'm going, but they were hooting for everybody. They hooted I got some little cheesy halfway nose ride on that twin fin under the pier, and they're all hooting for me and stuff. But after it, I was all indignant. I went up to Catree and I said, man, you can't have your judges cheering for guys. And he goes, why don't you go ahead and get up there and do it, And we had already been making surfboards, so he thought it was, he goes, everybody ends up hating the judges. So I'm going to get Pete in trouble with everybody by making him a judge. So it's another one of Dick's tricks that kind of backfired on him. He got me up there judging, and all of a sudden I'm finding all the best judges from New Smyrna and everywhere else. And meet guys like Mike Martin, who ended up being on the head judge for the World Tour for 7 years, And pro surfing took off, just took off, man. It was great. And Dick met me years later. He came to our factory and he goes, I told you to get into judging so that everybody hate you guys. He goes, I can't believe it worked out the other way. But Dick was a classic. I knew how to work Dick. Not many people did. Everybody was scared of him. And whatever a dirty trick Dick pulled on me, I would just tell all the kids. And go, yeah, Dick did this or Dick did that and stuff like that. And then Dick would have to come up to me going, stop telling everybody that. Well, John and them caught right onto it. They did Wave Rider magazine, and I just saw where Graham Cassidy in Australia, literally, I think somebody mentioned on Facebook a couple months ago that John had passed away. And here's Graham Cassidy from Australia, the guy does Tracks magazine, going, mate, that guy should be in the Hall of Fame, and that guy should be this. That guy started pro surfing and he did, I mean, they had a couple random pro contests. They had one in Atlantic Beach, and Yancey Spencer won it. And then Yancey had a pro contest in Pensacola. And we gathered all these Mike Kleins and everything else, and we went up there and figuring, oh, they're just Gulf Coast surfers, because I grew up in surfing in St. Pete, and that's nothing, man, don't worry about it. And there were so many hot surfers up there ripping it, and there was a real swell too. So it was great to see that evolve, you know. But yeah, John said, we got the rules and we're going to do this. And he called me up one time and just said, hey, I want you to come up to my office, you know, because we were advertising with them some. And I walk in, and there's a couch, and it's got Sean Thompson, Rabbit Bartholomew, Pete Townend. I mean, and they're all like sitting, the top 15 of the world are sitting on a couch next to them. They're ready to go, man. They're ready to go because they started the Florida Pro, man. And in those days, guys didn't go, oh, I've got a great salary, I'm going to skip this contest or skip that contest or cherry pick it. Freaking Rabbit Bartholomew was the world champ. He had just, PT won the first one, and then Rabbit Bartholomew was the world champ. And everywhere I went, there was a pro contest. Rabbit Bartholomew was there. When I went to France, Rabbit was there. When Florida Pro, Rabbit was here every contest, you know. Up the coast somewhere, somebody had a pro contest, Rabbit was there. World champ, man. You know, it was a really good. That's what pro surfing did. They took these world-class guys. Let me tell you one other thing, if I can. East Coast versus the world. We took up, when pro surf, we helped turn the French Lacanau contest into a pro contest. I went there and told them about all the judging. And the world contest was in France that year. So all of these top Aussie amateurs and Rabbit and Terry Richardson and all these insanely good surfers are there. And it was so funny because I'm sitting up there, and we had been doing this double wing round pin twin fin that we sold thousands of, because everybody else had, you know, G&S had a square thing that was about 12 inches across the back, and everybody was spinning out. And we had taken, put a slot in the bottom and a V off the tail and made a pintail. And all of a sudden you could control these things, you know, not as good as a tri-fin or anything, but you can control them. So we've got Nemo, Buddy Pelletier, Bob Roman, Mike Notary out there, and they're just blowing it up. And the Aussies are still on single fins, you know, and they're going across, and I'm like getting all egoed out. And Derek Hine comes up next to me and goes, mate, that's just what I was looking for. I'm looking for something like that, you know. And I'm like, oh yeah, man, yeah, okay. And so Terry Richardson's and Mike Notary goes, I saw Terry Richardson in Hawaii. He's phenomenal. You know, he does backside 360s and stuff on a single fin. And I'm going, he doesn't look that good out there. The Australians were already so far advanced that they were sandbagging in the practice area. They'd let these East Coast guys show Nemo's like, bam, throwing water shots 30 feet in the air and everything else. And these Rabbit literally knew so much about competition that there was a double bracket, a loser's round. So he purposefully lost his first round so he could go against the lesser surfers on a track to the thing. Because the French guy came in one day, and I'm there, and we're all discussing about the contest, and Rabbit looks at one of the French guys had come and shifted everything around. He just went, oh, this isn't right. This doesn't look good. So he just replaced all the surfers, and Rabbit tore into him. And I went, oh, Rabbit planned that out. Little Tommy Carroll was there, and all of these guys, these Aussies, you know, all these kids were naturally the best gifted kids, a lot of them, that I took over there. So these guys just walk down to the water and go out and rip as hard as they can to blow everybody's mind, because that's what they did around here. That's how it worked, you know. Well, Tommy Carroll's doing all these stretching exercises. Every Aussie's got a stretch routine before they go out, you know, and they're like athletes. And in between the heats, the dunes in Lacanau are about 50 yards high. They're doing run sprints up and down them and stuff, and our guys are like sitting around going, yeah, like, hey man, want to go back out? And it was just I mean, I was getting enlightened being there, and I could come back, and all of a sudden I said, man, we got to rewrite what we're doing over here, you know, to compete against these guys. Our trick on the East Coast is these guys had all been to Hawaii and ride points in Australia and stuff. and John Holman could get out there and flip a board around in the air in a 1-foot wave and beat them in the heat, because they're on the single fin and they're looking for the, where's the juice in this wave, mate? You know, when does it start going? But in the real world, our guys had to, you know, take it up a level, you know. So that was really cool to just see that, to just go like, uh-oh, you know, these guys are way ahead. But yeah, we had the talent over here. Tom Carroll's book says, I surfed all over the world, and the only place that I was scared was on the East Coast, because you could get beat at any moment in any one of those towns from any one of those kids on the East Coast. Rabbit Bartholomew's book, there's a whole paragraph of how he dreaded coming over here because some kid like Pat Mulhern was just going to smoke him on some, you know, 2-foot wave, get barreled, or Timmy Gilly or one of these guys is going to rip the waves apart, you know, and I'm the world champ, and I got to go up against some local kid, you know, and get beat, you know? Which they didn't often. They ended up winning most of the time anyway. But yeah. Two things happen business-wise. We're still in the Merritt Island factory, the little 1,000 square foot building, and we were having to buy outbuildings. Mike Nemnick was airbrushing in another building, and some of the one or two of the shaping rooms were in another building, while the new factory was getting built. And this guy just showed up one day and he goes, you know, we do business studies for you and we could probably really help your business, you know. And I went, you know, again, we're growing. I was learning business as I went along and stuff. And this guy goes, we have a guy who comes and does a business study and tells you what you need to do. So I said, okay, I'll try it out. It was only $200 and something. So this guy came in a full business suit, and he sat down in our dusty, no air conditioning office with planers going and everything else. And he went over all the paperwork. And he went, you know what? You're selling your boards for $228 wholesale. And you're making a profit of $1 a board. And he goes, if one person bounces a check on you, or something gets stolen, or you drop one and it breaks, you're losing that. Because we were starting to do more and more stuff, and it was getting harder and harder, you know? And so he said, average manufacturing profit is 20%. You need to tell everybody 20%. And he goes, I'll tell you something right now. If all of your dealers stop buying from you and one buys from you at the advanced 20%, you'll be making more money than you are now. And I went ding, light off in the head. And it was really cool because I could go, we had this guy do a business study on us. And I went up the coast and I said, we have to raise our price 20% because the costs have gotten ahead of us and stuff. And I was blown away that everyone, yeah, okay, you know, because there was a lot of young people back then and they didn't understand that much more than I did. All of a sudden, we've got money to do ads. And all of a sudden, you know, because when you're a kid starting out, you go, the blank cost me $15 or $20. The cloth back then only cost $1.62 a yard. And a drum of resin was $165, you know, and stuff like that. And you kind of went, wow, we're making a profit. We're making this much money off this. We're making $20 off every board. Well, all of a sudden, the resin and the cloth and all this stuff started going up. And it just left us behind, and every surfboard factory was suffering. And so adding that 20% on, we didn't hit that factory just with, okay, we got it all professional, we got all professionals in here, and we got everybody can do a real good capacity of work. We got a profit margin on the boards. Because as a young kid, you don't realize that you guys still got to buy pencils. You still got to buy paper to write stuff down on and stuff, and all that overhead eventually catches up and crushes you. And this guy did that full study, and he was like going, I can't believe that guy sold you one of these policies, so I have to come in here. But he was really cool, man. He leaped us ahead. And then we moved into that new factory, and it was just phenomenal, you know. Because it was designed it was 6,000 square feet, and it was designed for making surfboards. And Clark had just opened up his warehouse and stuff. It was like Happy Land, you know. And now there were 2 distributors on the East Coast. We used to have to order our resin directly from the company, you know, and if a truck didn't come in time or something like that, you're waiting for 10 drums of resin to show up, or you didn't have acetone. You had to drive down to Melbourne to Old Sarge's, was it? Old Sarge's, and get 5 rolls of tape and stuff. And suddenly Ross Houston's showing up with materials, and Brent Williams came over from Hawaii and started doing East Coast foam. So there was a foam there that Greg Lohr could do plugs for, and it was just machine gun, man. It was going crazy. And I used to load up my pickup truck and wedge 23 boards in there oddly, and then Debbie came one day and she put some pieces of cardboard between them and everything and got my pickup truck with 60 boards in it. And then that was a great leap forward as well. You know.
And after a few years after that, I'd help him. I would deliver boards around the area, or I'd pick up. My first daughter, Noelle, would come with us, come with me, and she'd ride. We'd get, you know, we were just part of the business then, you know, taking care of the books or whatever.
And then as time moved along and somehow she kept getting pregnant and having more kids, so we had to start getting these team kids in there like Bob Roman and different guys showing up, and they would work in the shop and do really well, you know. Of course, Bob's at high school at the time, and all the kids are coming by and buying boards and satellite. And then one Easter, I was driving up for the Easter contest, and I drove by, and the old Oceanside shop was open, and it was empty, and I was like going, gosh, we got to get that, because I was a Surfboards Hawaii freak back in the day, and we lived in that trailer park, and we used to come over to the Hawaii shop and look at all the absolutely gorgeous boards in there and stuff, you know. And so that was like, and then Billy Feinberg was such a great guy and had a great shop in there, and we went, that's an automatic, because people just be still, I mean, the way surfers are, 5 years later somebody's showing up going, where's Bill and Marjane, you know. And like Steve Holloway was a good friend, and that's when I contacted Steve, and he got a hold of Billy Feinberg and Marjane, and they went, oh yeah, we'd be behind you guys 100%. You know, go ahead and get in there, you know, and go for it. And gave us a real reasonable rent, and then Debbie went up there and started that, and then laid the babies around the shop floor and started selling surfboards and everything else. That's kind of how the kids running around under the clothes and the other surf team kids chasing them and stuff. And it evolved from there.
You know, then we had different managers in the shops as I got busier and busier with kids and stuff, but I still stayed all within the shop. You know, I made sure, yeah. And then hired Valerie. I met Valerie Evans. She graduated from Satellite. She's a surfer, real strong woman, real, you know, outspoken, just great to have. Great sergeant, you could say. And she helped me a lot. She helped me keep everything together. That's when we had Satellite, right before we opened the Cocoa Beach store. And she did great with the teams. We had a team, and she made them do practices. She made them run stairs. You know, Holland, all those kids, Morecambe, Mojado, all these little Satellite kids that were in our team. You know, they had a regiment. They had to do it. They had to do trash cleanups off the beach. They had to do. We did surf contest against. Well, that was when we started opening the Cocoa Beach store. There were 2 different teams then, so we had to do team contests against each other. And then that started the other shop team contest all together with everybody. So that was good for him, good experience. And then he would come out and judge them, you know, and tell them what they're doing wrong, you know, what they should do. Not doing wrong, but what they should do. So teams were a very important part for us. You know, they were our advertisement as to what kind of board we made and what kind of company we were.
Greg was always a designer. And he had come from Hawaii with those designs, and he kept evolving and coming up with things like double wing round pin twin and stuff like that. And Greg would get bored doing the same board because we were selling so many, and he'd go, I have a new idea. I'm going to do triple wings, or I'm going to do that. And he would do it, and it would be totally functional. And Rich Price was this kid who was polishing and had his system down and followed it. And you had Tommy Moss in there, which was a systematic guy. And Greg was like doing resin experiments and stuff. And we're going, what's wrong with this guy? You know, he's like mixing up different resin concoctions and all of this stuff. And Greg had come back for a year or two. And my old buddy Busby, we took a trip up the coast, just him and me, and he turns to me and he goes, hey, you guys are moving back to Florida. I grew up there. I lived there at Cocoa Beach my whole life. I want to stay up in Hatteras, but I'll come back for a year and train somebody to glass and do everything I do and just pay me this, pay me this much money. And for my, because he used to buy his own resin and his own cloth and stuff, and I bought my own blanks and sandpaper and stuff. And by the time we got in Hatteras, we were like becoming a real factory. And Buzz goes, I don't want to work on a production line and stuff like that. So we moved back down, and Dave Dietrich was on the Hobie team, but he was secretly getting boards from us because they were sending him these kind of barges, and he would secretly get boards from us and ride them, and then when there was a contest or something, he rode his Hobie, and Buzz taught him to laminate. And so Davo worked for a couple years, and he kind of went, I don't want to do this much work either, and so this kid Mark Trout came in, who he knew, and Mark Trout had a family which fit in with the Tommy Mosses and these guys, and Larry Pope was sanding with us then, and they learned in Catri's factory with Johnny Rice and Donnie Mulhern, which were adults. You didn't mess around with guys who had kids and a family, and you're going, oh, it's kind of nice. I'm going to go down to the inlet for the rest of the day. You didn't do that with those guys. You'd get beat up. So Tommy, and Rich was brought up in the system, and Greg kind of, these young guys coming in had to fit into that mold, and my brother Joe had moved over, and he was a airbrusher, laminator, sander, polisher, craftsman, he learned it all, so he was a great backup guy in there too. But Greg got more and more into design work, and then he wanted to do his own label, because through natural art he had become really famous he was already famous as a surfer, but he was all starting to do boards for John Parton at Fox and doing boards for the guys at Ocean Avenue on the sly. He'd just go down there and do them some boards and stuff, which was cool. But he said, well, I'm going to kind of go out on my own, and I'll teach Rich like I told you. And Rich was there and ready to go, and he taught Rich all his strokes. Greg Lord could take a blank and go, oh, there's a low spot there, and you can see where the hinges gave on this blank a little bit. And these other kids were going straight to Clark foam and running a planer over the bottom. That dip stayed there. Or they had to spend 4 hours after the board was almost finished going, how am I going to get rid of that dip in the rail? Well, Greg had this system where he would plane all the high spots and low spots out of blanks, take a bunch of them, then plane those blanks down, so he had his own blank thickness, and then he would cut them out, and he would shape on his rails and stuff. Bing, the board was done. So he could, if he wanted to, he could do 8. Well, Rich learned from him, and Rich learned how to do 8 boards a day from Greg, and everything was there in the perfect place by prepping the blank ahead of time, where a lot of kids were just going, oh, I'm going to go to Clark and get 6 blanks and plane them down. I'm going to become a surfboard company, and then they were all wondering why they're spending 8 hours on a shape, and stuff. And Greg had perfected the system, and then Greg was getting into the epoxy and the EPS foam, and we were still kind of ridiculing him, going, come on, Greg, what are you doing? And everybody was down on him, and he just kept at it. And if you wanted to do an epoxy board back then, you had to use this system that had all these cancerous materials in it. Greg, who had turned into this genius science boy, all of a sudden went all around and got the chemicals to where you were using epoxy resin, but it wasn't going to kill you, and it wasn't going to make you, because guys were coming up going, he's crazy, because I tried to do an epoxy board one time and my wrist broke out, and stuff. And he had perfected a resin. And I mean, nowadays he sends container loads all over the freaking world of his resin and stuff. He started the whole EPS, super light, super thin board thing. And it was just a big advance forward. But that's when Rich came into his own. Rich just went, I'll do it. Because he was brought up through the factory of polishing and sanding and getting your work done. And Greg was this kid who built up these systems, but his brain was going 100 miles an hour, man. I went into his place where he was doing his foam one day, and he had like a 20-foot catamaran hull that he had shaped, hand-shaped, and it was flawless, man. And they just took a mold off of it and switched the mold to the other side for some guy. He hand-shaped this mold. I was just like going, oh my God, man, So yeah, I went to Clark, and all these guys are coming in from New Smyrna. About 6 of them in a row came in. I'm friends with them, and I'm chatting to them, and I'm going, why don't one of you guys go, I'm going down to Clark. You want something? And we'll load up everybody's blanks. And they just clam up, because they started making boards in the competitive era. So they were all competing against each other. So it was knuckles and know-how, as Larry Pope puts it. They were like super heavy surfing competitors, and Bernie Crouch started making boards, and Randy Richenberg started making boards, and these guys started making boards, and we had a brotherhood down here, because we had the 60s guys who were like calling fire marshals on us and stuff. So we had a brotherhood of everybody who was making boards. I would go into the Sunshine House, and Sam Gornto would go, hey, we got this new stuff. It's really cool. It's a screen, and you can screen the rails and put the curve right in them and stuff. I'm going, really? And he goes, yeah, I'll go get you some, And it was like that, And Claudia wanted to get his boards made. Claudia came to our factory and got his boards made there, So there wasn't anybody trying to put anybody out of business down here. It was like a brotherhood, man. Well, you always think everything's going to continue on forever, and you're working every day to make it easier and better and more flowing and better production and a better system with dealers. I mean, we had a dealer in Japan that we had 27 shops in Japan, and we had guys in Panama and Chile, and we were doing pro contests down in Barbados, and we had a great dealer down there, and everything was jamming. And then on 9/11, it was just terrible for the whole country. I mean, I was out surfing, and the waves were perfect, and there wasn't one person out at the whole beach. And the guy who lived next to our shop in Cocoa Beach came up to the beach, and he's standing up there, and I'm like, Ace Hardaway, I'm going, hey, Ace, what's up? Why aren't you out? And he comes down the water's edge, and he's standing there, and he went, hey man, we're at war. And shortly after that, the Air Force Base decided to shut down the highway where everybody gets to us. And we were at the very south end of Cocoa Beach. So the usual surfer route is from Orlando or whatever, so kind of just weave down and find your breaks and stuff. And tons of people surfed across the street from our shop. And all of a sudden, the Air Force Base totally shut off the road. You could not go up A1A. And Debbie used to have to get up every morning and drive out Tropical Trail, Merritt Island, drive all the way down, come through Cocoa Beach, all the way down to the south end to our shop, and sit in there. And 2 or 3 people had come in during the day, and that was it, And it was going into the winter, so we're trimming down this massive amount of dealers everywhere, for summertime in France and summertime in Japan and all this different stuff, to where we're just relying on South Florida. So and not only that, people had started getting boards made, these pop-out boards that were actually beautiful, and they were epoxy. they were made in Thailand and stuff, and they're bringing in container loads of them. And Larry Pope, who's actually the cynic prophet of surfing, he's the guy who came up with it. He goes, it was a perfect storm. You all of a sudden couldn't get to your business, and all of a sudden there's container loads of boards coming in. And these guys are calling up people going, and Al Merrick got bought by this real wealthy guy, and started giving people 90 days. So instead of driving up and down the coast and express mailing home 30 grand or something like that from New York, which was cool. I discovered that on the road. I'd be in North Carolina and I had $10,000, and the guys down there are like going, hey, where's our next paycheck, you know? But I found out that with priority mail or express mail, that those checks could be there the next day, and I go to the next batch of people up the coast, send the money right back. And all of a sudden, all of these shops are going, I haven't sold a bar of wax in 2 weeks, man. You know, I mean, it shut down the entire coast, you know. And Al Merrick and these guys are going, we'll come in the spring, give you 45 boards, and at the end of the year, you go ahead and pay us for whatever you sold. Because that's what the Burton snowboard guy had done with snowboards. He chased out all the Chinese and everybody else by going to every snowboard shop and going, here, I'll stock your shop, you know, and you pay me at the end of the season. Well, surf shops are notorious for going, wow, I got this extra money from these surfboards. I'm going to get a new scarf and some new shoes and maybe a sailboat, you know. So these guys could cover, 2 or 3 of these California companies competed with them. Lost was bought out by O'Neill or something. So all of a sudden, these guys are like going around going, well, if they're given 90 days, we're given 90 days. And we were built on just turning over money. And people would be, I'd go down to some of these shops, Kirk Cottrell's, and he'd buy 40 boards in South Florida, and he'd go back and bring me another 20. You know, we went from that to guys going like, I don't know, I got my shops really filled up with these boards from California. So we had basically wiped California off the map on the East Coast, and all of a sudden these guys are just fronting people boards and stuff, you know, and we can't get to our shop, we can't get to our showroom, and everybody's in shock all the way up the coast, you know, from 9/11 and stuff, you know.
Oh, and then you had to evolve. When everything started changing, you had to start evolving. Shops were different, you know. We mostly stayed surfboard, baggies, accessories. I didn't do the clothing. The clothing, I let Valerie do the clothing in Satellite because they had the kids there that bought more clothing, you know, and I am not a fashion person. So Valerie was good at that. She did that. And so we really tried to keep, you know, hardcore Cocoa Beach, and then we had to start evolving from that. And, you know, you had to make things for you to do. Shops, you know, get lonely sometimes. That's when I started doing the furniture in the end.
It really took us to where we were in super debt for everything and stuff. And they went ahead and said they knew how bad they had done, so they set up a thing where you could go to the Small Business Administration and get a loan. So, little known to us, we were also going into a recession, you know, a war recession. So I made a great presentation for SBA, and I'm riding around with Debbie somewhere up in Georgia because there wasn't a lot we could do. And the SBA calls me up and goes, you made the best presentation of anybody in your whole area, and we think it's magnificent. You need $150,000, we're going to give you $75,000. And what that ended up doing was I could get everybody paid off and be at zero going into a 5-year recession. So it was like, beat me up, man. Throw me to the ground, you know. And we made a lot of adjustments. We moved to a smaller factory and stuff like that. And still had great craftsmen. We had Brian Hinton laminating, and that guy could knock out 20 laminations a day. He'd get there at 4 or 5 in the morning when it was cool, and go to lunch and come back and put the rest on it the rest of the day. About 75%. What's that?
Cut everything down.
Yeah, 75%, you know. And we were already committed for ads and committed for this and committed for everything else, and had that big factory that we're paying $3,000 something a month on, and it was just impossible. It was immediately impossible, you know. And of course, I made some rude statements to the guys at Patrick Air Force Base who shut the road down, you know. And I was kind of computer savvy and internet savvy, so I was getting on people's emails at the Patrick Air Force Base and going, hey, what did you do? And these people, you know, they're local people. They're going, we're so sorry, there's nothing we can do. It's the way it's done, and we can't do anything, you know. And, you know, I said, what do you expect a bunch of guys from Afghanistan to swim over and read boats and throw their sandals up at Patrick Air Force? I mean, I was pretty rude about it until Debbie said, hey, the Air Force guys were coming into our shop buying stuff because they knew how screwed we were, but it was no way back, man. You know, I mean, it was really cool because they wrote something up in the Orlando Sentinel, and guys were driving all the way over from Orlando to go like, yeah, I'll take that wetsuit. Yeah, I'll take this. You know, guys who were kind of wealthy or something, you know, guy'd pull up in a Mercedes-Benz and go, yeah, I'll take that board over there and stuff. But it still wasn't that flow of people coming in all day long buying stuff from you, you know. So it was screwed after that.
When you finally shut the doors.
What's that?
It was the end of that era.
Yeah, that was the end of that area, that whole growth area and everything else.
08, 09.
It was cool the shaping machines came along because I could take a lot of the shapes, and we still had Peter Mendia and Baron Knowlton and Scotty McCran. We still had our team, and I could take all their boards and clone them and put them on the shaping machine, and I could finish out 8 boards myself because all the milling was done and all the curves of our design were in it, you know. And but I was kind of getting sicker and sicker from different stuff, and you know, it just ended up you know, working down. I was actually even going up to Greg Geiselman's factory, and Greg was great. They had a computer shape, and they showed me all the stuff, and being a computer baby, I figured it out, and we'd have our boards up there. But you know, driving all the way up to Edgewater, south of New Smyrna, every day or 2 days or something really got old, and I was getting old. I was getting to Titusville and pulling in the rest area and taking a nap and going the rest of the way. I would crack those guys up in the factory. I go, I got here a little late. I had to stop in Titusville to take a nap, man. And yeah, so luckily these guys in Brazil had been using our name to make clothing, and they were a real strong company. And I finally, over the years, you bump into people like Bob Hurley said, you guys got the best name. You guys should be doing more with your name. You know, different people were always saying that to me. So I started calling around to all of these guys and going, hey, you guys want to take natural art to the next level or something? And Hurley's just one of the greatest guys on earth. He just went, oh, I've already sold my name twice, and I'm just an employee of Nike now, so I can't do something like that. Different guys. So I contacted this guy in Brazil who just kind of lifted our name, as Brazilians do, and was making millions of dollars a year on the clothes. And he was really cool. But I said, hey, do you want to buy this? Because this will be your market. You know, I could sell it to Hurley, or I could sell it to somebody else. And he flew up, and we negotiated, and he gave me a chunk of money. So at least for the name, you know. Scott can still keep the name up in Hatteras. I made sure of that. That's his gig, you know, and they've kind of gone through, like a lot of South and Central American companies have gone through their recessions and buildups and everything else. So they've never really fully tapped into the market up here because, you know, the surf industry clothing thing even suffered severely, you know. So you can't just come in and go, okay, we're a new line and we're going to come up here and take over or something like that. I hear all these underground, because I have so many connections in the industry about, you know, little horror stories and, you know, the stock of these companies that went to the stock market that were once, I bought some, you know, at $7 and sold it at 17, some Quicksilver that a lot of these stocks now are at 65 cents and stuff like that. And they have problems and they're getting bought out and all these different things shifting around in the industry. And I have friends in California I call up, and it's so established in California, and they have so many surfers and so many I mean, it started in the 20s over there. They got 80-year-olds that are still paddling out and surfing and buying boards and stuff, you know. And over here, it started in the 60s and it blew up. And you go to some of these beaches now where, like Perkins, you used to go up there and go, it was like a pro contest, you know. You had Bob Roman and Lance Trout out there, and all these different guys, the Savage Brothers and stuff. They're out there blowing up, man. And, you know, you go up there now and there's a couple guys on longboards riding straight in and stuff, you know. So, but the pro circuit's going really good. But that kind of got bought out by these Walmart people. But there's money there, and I've been following the contest, and the judging is insanely good. I mean, I'm just blown out. I walk in and see my buddy Hunter, who announced a lot of contests at Indo Board, and he'd be watching one of the contests and go, "What are you giving for that?" I'd go, "It looked like about a 6.8, you know." And they announced the score, and it's a 6.9 or something like that. And I'm just like, and I watch these contests, and you go like, oh, that guy's, you know, the announcer, which I always train my judges, don't listen to the announcer. Don't get hyped up. Their job is to hype up the crowd. Your job is to pick that wave apart and use your stoke meter. If somebody gets an insane wave, give them a 10. If somebody stinks, give them a 1, you know? And it'll all work out through the judging and the tabulating and stuff. Don't be afraid. And gosh, I see these guys now, and I know I should be bitter and say, like, I should still be up there and I would straighten this. They're insane. The judging in pro surfing is so good, and the level of surfing is insane. There's a little bit too much pop in their board. I'll tell you kids something that you should learn. I overheard one time when Todd Holland was on the NSSA national team, and he smoked this heat in Puerto Rico, and he came by and everybody's going, yeah, Todd, yeah. But what he had been doing was going up and hitting the lip and doing that East Coast thing, coming down to the bottom and popping his board on the bottom 2 or 3 times and then throwing it up. And Ian Cairns was in charge of this pro contest, and he was also in charge of the NSSA. And Ian Cairns goes, get over here. And he goes, if you ever come down off a hitting the lip and don't land on your rail and be driving into your next maneuver, you know, I'm going to slap you in the head. And Todd went, yes, sir, you know. And I just watched one of the contests in Australia, and they had Rabbit there with the announcers. And they're like raving about people popping their lips and doing little aerial bump lifts and landing in the white water, which shouldn't mean anything. And Rabbit's following this one kid, Emersley or something like that, and he's going full rail cut back in the hook, bouncing it off the lip. There he goes. He's used the speed for redirection, and there he goes, you know. And I don't know if it even hit these announcers, man. It hit right to my soul. There's Rabbit telling them like it should be, real surfing. But the judging is insane now. It's so good, you know. I mean, even the contest in Barbados, it was kind of an amateur contest, you know, for and the judging was outstanding, you know. I just watched that whole thing, you know. The announcers are going, oh, he's coming to the inside. Oh, he's going to do a pretty maneuver here. And go, these guys have already got their scores in their head from the outside where he hit the lip and he cut back under the hook and everything else, you know. So, yeah, that's one thing that's still going strong, man. Pro surfing's going really well.
I love surfing, and I don't follow it like he does. I'll sit and watch it, and I'll watch some of my Vestal DVDs on YouTube and stuff, you know, like Sipping Jet Streams and stuff. I just love those. And then we'll watch the old movies and we'll just go, whoa, look at, remember that, you know, remember that. So it's all a memory. It's all there. It was all good. We raised, you know, we had our workers and they all had kids, and we all I think had a pretty good life for that time frame, you know. I loved retail. I liked the shop.
And you got to travel, go down to Barbados,
a little
Europe.
bit, sometimes, a couple of times. Now he'll go on a ride and he'll go look at them. 2 hours later he comes back and goes, oh yeah, you should see the waves. I'm going, dude, why didn't you come home and tell me? He goes, they might have been too big for you today. I went, oh, okay. I have learned my lesson.
The best part is we used to go surfing together, and you know, I'm like any guy, I'm like looking for a peak or something. Debbie's talking about the kids or talking about this or whatever, and I'm gone. I'm paddling down the beach, and she'd go, "What, are you embarrassed to sit next to me and stuff? What's going on?" And that went on for a long time. And then when I started losing my muscles, you know, with this disease I have and stuff, and eventually it got to where I could paddle out, but I had to prone in. And I'd paddle out and paddle up next to Debbie, and she'd go, "Get away from me, kook."
I'm not surfing
She'd
next
go
to you.
paddle down the beach, pal.
Yeah. And I still surf mostly right here at the old Perkins. There's a nice little group out there that comes. Most of them live in this little area, you know, and you don't have to deal. High Tower is very crowded. And we have reef all the way down. So you could paddle a condo down, and it'll be a different wave than at the boardwalk here, right in front here. Just like any of our beaches, you know, with the high rock or flat sand bottom. But like you said, it's just, we have a trough again now. So you have your tide that you can surf on. So, but I love it. Makes me happy. I got a big old wax smile. Every time I go out, I smile on my board like this with my wax.
There it is, my whole life in a nutshell. And my beloved wife, Debbie.
Hey, where you going? Hey, what you gonna do? Hey, where you going? I just wanna spend some time with you. I know these lines ain't so clever, yet I'm hoping that your eyes will see. The towels on your hands ain't no sweeter than the time I hope you spend with me.
And the reason is this guy right here, Pete Dooley. All of these shapers, including myself and Richard Price here, who helped judge, all worked for natural art. We all learned our craft from this guy right here, Pete Dooley. And I did a little math. Yeah, I can do math. Our 6 shapers, their combined experience building surfboards is 314 years of experience. Combined experience. I'm going to tell you a quick story about the board they copied. This is the board that Pete Dooley shaped. A friend of mine, Matt Molina, found this board in a pawn shop or somewhere. Called up Pete, said, "I found this little natural art fish, and it says rosy cakes on the bottom, rosy fish cakes." That's what it says on the board. And Pete said, "I shaped that board for my wife, Debbie Dooley." Where's Deb at? So we took the board, we restored it for him, and yeah, it was in this nice a shape when we got it.
Yeah, it was bad, wasn't it?
We made it look nice and brought it over to Debbie. And,
On my birthday.
On her birthday. Never forget to look at her eye.
Yeah, it was cool.
When she saw that board. Who else do I gotta thank? Pete Dooley. Gotta thank Pete Dooley for being here, being our honorary. Well deserved.
Yeah.
So we pick an honoree. Second hard part is find a board that honoree shaped. So we got that. Then we asked the honoree, so who would you like to shape in the shape of? Who do you want to honor you in this? And the honoree gives us a list of names, and I start calling the list. And this year is the very first year, the first 6 guys I called all agreed that they shape.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
The winner is going to get $2,000.
Wow.
Proceeds for Expo. He's going to get this list surfboard rack system. I thought they were going to bring it by, but it's right here. It's a surfboard rack system that Liz donated. And lastly, the winner of the Florida Shape Off here at Surf Expo gets to compete in the boardroom show in California, where the Shape Off was invented by Scott Bass and Chris Christensen. It's in October. So this year's winner will go over to California and compete against these California guys. Two shapers that shaped in the Shape Off had not picked up a planer in over 25, 30 years. Not picked up a planer. And they got in there and did this for Pete. So that's Bob Roman and Greg Moore.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thing, I'm trying to figure out where they're going to go.
Yeah. I don't know. Don't worry about what.
Tommy Moss.
Yeah! Yeah!
Yeah, you want to grab the trophy?
It's a trophy too. Tommy's shape for natural art. He did his new designs logo. Tommy shaped for driftwood surfboards. Then came over and started shaping at my factory under Hawaiian style. Then he shaped for Donald Tapiano. Also ran over to California and ran Donald's factory in Oceanside for over 15 years. How long were you at Donald's? 18 years. So he ran Donald Tapiano's factory in 18 years. So now he's back here in Florida, semi-retired, but he still works for us at R&D, and I'm glad to have him.
Lemonade!
Yep, he's doing the lemonade work for us. Chris Birch.
Yeah!
Chris worked at Natural a long time. Chris Birch is kind of responsible in part for me getting my job at Natural Art. He was polishing surfboards and said, I don't want to do this anymore, I need somebody to take over. So I quit my rock star career and became a polisher.
The winner is Alan Wright.
Yeah!
Big Alan. He's been a few shape-offs. So many times he come up to me after the shape-off, so what did I do wrong? Ricky, what did I do wrong? You did it right this time, Alan.
It's how we act, so what we say.
I got to thank Jill Rose and Angie here and Roy from Surf Expo that really make this thing happen.
Alan couldn't have done it without balance.
Hey, yeah, where you going? I just want to spend some time with you. I just want to spend some time with you. I just want to spend some time with you.